Christine Brennan is releasing her book about Caitlin Clark, and she talks about the impact of Caitlin Clark, and I'm sure there will be so many wholesome stories and uplifting things about Caitlin, but she is also sharing a look behind the scenes at a lot of the drama and negative things.
Readers picking up the book don't appear to be searching for lighthearted anecdotes or nostalgic storytelling. Instead, many seem drawn by the promise of unfiltered insight into how one of basketball's most talked about newcomers surged into prominence and how decision-makers responded behind the scenes. According to discussions surrounding the release, the reporting portrays a striking level of skepticism among certain officials at the very moment excitement outside the league was exploding. One anecdote that has sparked particular interest involves a comparison to Maya Moore, a legendary figure whose professional debut was widely celebrated. In the account, a senior official reportedly suggested that the new star's arrival would resemble Moore's entry, significant but ultimately routine in the broader arc of league history. For seasoned basketball followers, that comparison has become a focal point of debate. Moore's impact on the court and in the community is universally respected, yet many analysts argue that the scale of nationwide attention surrounding the newer player's debut was unprecedented. That contrast has fueled discussion about whether league leadership underestimated the magnitude of the moment. Critics say failing to recognize a cultural surge when it first appears can lead organizations to miss opportunities, especially in an era when social media can amplify popularity overnight. Supporters of the league counter that predicting the exact scale of a phenomenon is extraordinarily difficult and that hindsight often makes missed signals seem more obvious than they were at the time. Still, the story resonates because it highlights how perception shapes decision-making. If leaders interpret a major event as routine, they may allocate resources conservatively. If they see it as historic, they might respond aggressively. The difference between those two outlooks can influence marketing strategies, staffing, scheduling, and fan engagement. In fast-moving industries like professional sports, timing is everything. Recognizing momentum early can mean the difference between capitalizing on it and scrambling to catch up later. The fascination surrounding this episode shows how much audiences value behind-the-scenes context. Fans aren't satisfied with knowing what happened, they want to understand why it happened and whether it could have unfolded differently. That desire for explanation is precisely what gives investigative sportsbooks their lasting appeal.
The first to realize Caitlin's pull on fans. When do you think the WNBA fully realized what it had?
Publicly, I'm not sure that they really have. They certainly know, they have to know, Keith. But in terms of the comments, in terms of the way the commissioner, Kathy Engelbert, who I've known and I like, the way she has trouble talking about Caitlin Clark, or if she's asked about Caitlin, then she will say, well, Caitlin and Angel. Well, she wasn't asked about Angel, she was asked about Caitlin. This incredible inability to deal with the facts and to state the obvious. It is astounding to me how Kathy Engelbert doesn't come out after the Marina Mabry hit and say, that's unacceptable, the refs got it wrong. Okay, should have been kicked out then, you weren't, but now I'm going to kick you out, you're suspended for another game or two. That's just unacceptable behavior for someone who's so important to the league, or to any player, right? Mm-hmm. They can't do that.
Speculation is already building about how the league might respond if criticism intensifies. Some observers wonder whether officials will attempt to publicly challenge the book's claims or question its framing, while others believe the organization will avoid direct confrontation to prevent amplifying the controversy. The uncertainty itself has fueled anticipation, with commentators describing the situation as a brewing storm that could test the league's media strategy and crisis management skills. Part of the reason this publication carries such weight is the author's long track record in sports journalism. She has covered women's athletics for decades, documenting milestones, struggles, and cultural shifts long before the current generation of stars emerged. That history lends credibility in the eyes of many readers, who view her not as an outsider seeking attention but as a veteran observer with institutional knowledge. When someone with that background releases a critical account, it tends to be taken seriously even by those who ultimately disagree with the conclusions. Another factor driving interest is the book's connection to Caitlin Clark, whose arrival in professional basketball has been widely described as transformative. Her rapid rise has drawn new audiences, boosted television ratings, and sparked discussions about the sport's future trajectory. Because she represents such a pivotal figure, any narrative that explores how institutions responded to her emergence instantly becomes more compelling. Readers aren't just curious about behind-the-scenes details, they want context that explains how a single athlete's debut could reshape an entire league's visibility. The bestseller ranking signals that demand for that context is enormous. Fans appear eager for information that goes beyond highlight reels and promotional campaigns. They want analysis, explanation, and perhaps even confrontation with uncomfortable truths. In today's media landscape, audiences often gravitate toward content that promises insider insight rather than polished public relations messaging. That appetite helps explain why a book promising revelations can spread so quickly through word of mouth alone. Whether the reaction ultimately proves supportive or critical, one thing is already clear: the conversation has moved beyond speculation about games and statistics. It has shifted toward questions about leadership, perception, and the relationship between athletes, executives, and media. And once a sports story reaches that level, it tends to linger far longer than a single news cycle.
He's saying, wait, we've done all this, and we toiled in relative obscurity with low TV ratings and low attendance, and most people not caring, the vast majority of the country. And now along comes one person, obviously one person who's magical, who's chucking it from the parking lot and it's going in, and who is, those passes are the greatest passes and otherworldly talent. They're looking at it and saying, why is it happening now?
Right now, the WNBA finds itself surrounded by controversy, speculation, and mounting scrutiny as Christine Brennan's newest book rockets straight to the top of Amazon's bestseller rankings. That sudden surge in popularity hasn't just drawn attention from readers and fans, it has reportedly sent shockwaves through league offices, where insiders claim officials are scrambling behind closed doors to assess the fallout. According to early reactions circulating among media circles, the material inside the book doesn't merely critique surface-level decisions or offer mild commentary. Instead, it allegedly dives deep into internal dynamics, revisits past controversies, and examines structural issues that critics say have lingered for years. The intensity of the response stems from the perception that this isn't a routine sports release or a celebratory chronicle of athletic achievement. Rather, it's being discussed as an investigative narrative that pulls back the curtain on leadership choices, marketing strategies, and institutional blind spots. Observers suggest that what makes the situation especially tense is the timing. The league has recently experienced a surge of public interest and visibility, and a high-profile book challenging its decision-making could influence how that momentum evolves. Executives are said to be monitoring public reaction closely, aware that narratives formed now could shape public perception for years. Within sports media, anticipation has grown as commentators speculate about which revelations will spark the strongest reactions. Some insiders claim the book revisits long-standing debates about governance, promotion, and player relations, presenting them in a way that feels newly urgent rather than historical. If that interpretation proves accurate, it could force difficult conversations about accountability and long-term strategy. What's striking is how quickly discussion has spread beyond literary circles. Analysts, bloggers, and talk show hosts are already dissecting excerpts and summaries, debating whether the claims signal systemic problems or simply reflect one journalist's perspective. Either way, the buzz itself has become a story. The more people talk about the book, the more its influence grows, creating a feedback loop of curiosity and controversy. If early reactions are any indication, the real impact may not lie solely in what's written on the pages but in how audiences interpret it. Books that challenge powerful institutions often generate ripple effects far beyond publishing charts, especially when they intersect with a moment of heightened public attention. And judging by the intensity of the conversation so far, this release may be poised to do exactly that.
Clark has changed the game. She changed it in college and in the WNBA. We know she broke all those records in college, but what was it about Caitlin that has just garnered so much attention and changed things the way that she has?
You know, Rihanna, obviously she's a basketball player, clearly, as you can see, but she's also an entertainer. And that's what takes her to a different realm, very much like Tiger Woods, right? When you see those logo threes, she's, shooting from the parking lot and it's going in. That's where people who don't necessarily pay attention to or love basketball, they're intrigued by that. Or those passes, those no-look passes, incredible length of the court. And that's where people like grandmothers who wouldn't care about this, or grandfathers, they're now rearranging their evenings to watch Caitlin Clark games. She's really the high-wire act. And I think that's the difference between her and all the others.
According to accounts circulating among commentators, league decision-makers initially expected the season of that high-profile debut to unfold like any other. They anticipated steady interest, routine attendance, and the typical promotional cycle that accompanies a new class of players. What they encountered instead was a surge that seemed to outpace preparation at nearly every level. Reports describe arenas filling earlier than expected, merchandise selling faster than projected, and security teams adjusting on the fly as crowds exceeded forecasts. Analysts reviewing the situation argue that the signs of extraordinary demand were visible well before opening tip-off. Television metrics from college games had already hinted at expanding viewership, and online engagement suggested a rapidly growing fan base. Yet critics say those signals weren't fully integrated into planning models. If that assessment is accurate, it would mean the organization treated a potentially historic debut as a standard operational scenario. Comparisons have been drawn to how other leagues, including the NBA, have handled breakout stars in the past. In those cases, rapid adjustments were made to marketing campaigns, broadcast schedules, and venue logistics to accommodate surging demand. Observers questioning the response in this instance argue that similar flexibility might have allowed for a smoother rollout. Defenders counter that scaling operations instantly is far easier in theory than in practice, especially when dealing with fixed budgets and preset schedules. What makes the debate so intense is that it centers on opportunity. When interest spikes suddenly, organizations must decide whether to treat it as a temporary surge or a long-term shift. Misjudging that distinction can shape revenue, reputation, and growth trajectories. If leaders assume excitement will fade quickly, they may hesitate to invest heavily. If they assume it signals a lasting transformation, they might expand aggressively. Determining which interpretation is correct requires both data and intuition, and even then, certainty is elusive. Behind the scenes, the tension described in discussions of the book reportedly extends beyond marketing logistics into broader questions about planning and foresight. Whether those portrayals are entirely accurate remains debated, but their circulation alone has intensified scrutiny. Once a narrative suggesting missed opportunity gains traction, it can become a reference point for every subsequent decision.
There's so much negative attention to Caitlin Clark being white.
For the longest time, this was seen and still is as a majority black league. And it is 74% black. And so I think all of us understand that the issues that can come up in that situation.
One of the most debated themes emerging from conversations about the book is how organizations respond when a single athlete's popularity eclipses expectations. Historically, leagues that successfully harness such moments often rally around the star, positioning them as a centerpiece attraction. Golf's embrace of Tiger Woods is frequently cited as an example, as is basketball's elevation of Michael Jordan during his prime years. In both cases, governing bodies and promotional partners amplified the spotlight, turning individual brilliance into league-wide momentum. The PGA Tour and professional basketball leadership alike recognized that extraordinary talent could serve as a catalyst for growth if supported strategically. Commentators analyzing the current situation argue that the response described in Brennan's reporting appears more complicated. Instead of a unified promotional push, they claim the environment sometimes seemed uncertain, as though officials were still deciding how prominently to feature their breakout attraction. Some interpret that hesitation as caution, others see it as a missed chance to accelerate expansion. The debate extends to on-court dynamics as well. Supporters of the star in question point to physical defensive plays and heated exchanges as signs she faced unusual resistance. Skeptics respond that intense competition is inevitable when a highly skilled newcomer enters a professional league. In their view, tough defense reflects respect for her abilities rather than hostility toward her presence. Another layer involves media interaction. Reports suggesting that certain questions were discouraged or redirected have fueled speculation about how openly the situation was discussed at the time. If accurate, such claims would raise questions about transparency. If exaggerated, they could illustrate how quickly narratives can grow once they capture public imagination. Ultimately, the controversy underscores a broader truth about professional sports: perception often shapes legacy as much as performance. How a league reacts to a breakout phenomenon can influence not only immediate publicity but also long-term credibility. That's why discussions sparked by investigative accounts rarely fade quickly. They touch on identity, leadership, and vision all at once.